This is Justice Voices, stories that need to be told, voices that need to be heard. You're an extraordinary person. Well, there are other extraordinary people that are out
Absolutely.
there that are doing some terribly tragic things, and it could have been different, and it can be different.
Yeah.
What's really significant to me about your story is that you have done some extraordinary things, but there are so many people like you that could also do extraordinary things if they were somehow on a different track. Now, how to get there? Yeah, that's a problem we need to be addressing. How to deal with all this trauma? Yeah, that's what we ought to be addressing. And your program is addressing those things, and I want to get to that. I don't want to cut you off. But I want to move to at some point soon in this conversation to READI Chicago and how you're going about addressing those root cause problems.
Yeah. Well, let's do that, David. Let's spend some time in this space, right? About how do we solve, right? Like how do we talk about solutions? I mentioned earlier about meeting with the president back in early June, and let me just say, as somebody who's been formerly incarcerated and somebody who's in the space of gun violence, I was blown away by sitting just 3 feet away from the president in a small room at the Roosevelt Room in the White House. And I remember just 2 months before that, I was at the Rose Garden with the president as well, as he was making an announcement around this issue of gun violence and really pushing some legislation to support the field, right? To support services, best practices, and evidence-based. And so there's never been another president who's done that. Not even Obama, for that matter. And so that gave me a lot of hope. And I hope I'm hopeful that it also gives hope for a lot of people who are incarcerated or who are living through this process right now, right? And so here's what I'll say. We have been able to serve about 1,600 people thus far within READI Chicago. And people might be scratching their heads, say like, well, 1,600 people in 4 years, well, that's not a lot, Eddie. Well, you recall earlier I said,
maybe not in Chicago, but it's a lot of people most places in this country, and every one of those people is priceless.
Yep, I agreed. I totally agree, David. So, but here's what I want to add to that then, is that imagine right now if the way that we looked at gun violence was the same way that the CDC looks at any outbreaks of infectious diseases, syphilis, gonorrhea, HIV, COVID. And imagine as part of the steps, right, the CDC takes, that the field of gun violence and criminal justice reform also took some lessons from that. And here's what I mean by that. The CDC typically, what they try to focus on is education when there's outbreaks, and they try to narrow down where the carriers are at, who's spreading the virus, and then to saturate them with the resources that are needed, David. They give the vaccines, they give literature, they hunt them down, like they go look for them, because they also know that if they're unable to treat this right, that spread becomes contagious for everybody else. And so with the way that we approach READI Chicago is, we know who is more likely to be a victim or offender of gun violence. But instead of taking a punitive approach by scaring them straight or by saying, hey, we know who you are, you're a gang leader, or we see you walking around with guns and so on. Imagine if you just saturate them with resources. And so there are 3 ways that people come to us, David. There is our partnership with the Department of Corrections and the Cook County Jail, where they identify people with gun cases or violent offenses, and whether they're on parole or they're on electronic monitoring. That's who we serve. In fact, we've served over 400 people that were just on parole. And in fact, within the Cook County Jail, I would say just about every single person that is on electronic monitoring who's in our program has a gun case. That's who we decided to work with. Like, we want to work with the highest risk individuals.
And when you say high risk, what you're talking about is not necessarily high threat, but high risk of repeat offenses.
Repeat offenses, especially for violent offenses or or victimization. Right. And so we also have amazing partners in our community. We have 6 amazing partners, some of them which are Northern Employment Network, INVC, Centers for New Horizon, UCAN, Heartland. And these agencies identify people through street outreach. They identify individuals who they believe are also at high risk in these communities. So we use human intel. So now we use...
So high risk and high threat.
And high threat, correct. So think about it. But now we have the corrections, we have the jail as one point of identifying people. Now we have human intel from the people on the ground doing the work. And then the third part, this is pretty innovative in many ways. This is like another tool to add to the field of gun violence, is that we use this risk assessment, this predictive analytics by the University of Chicago's crime lab, where they help identify individuals who might not necessarily be in our radar, but they use police data, hospital data, a number of other data points to say, hey, Eddie, we got a list of individuals that if we don't reach out to them, we don't find them and reach out to them, right? They're more likely to go shoot somebody who gets shot. So we use that kind of intel as well, right? To
big data.
Yeah, to just go look for these guys. In some cases, some of our outreach workers don't even have an idea who these guys actually were. And I would say, man, if you were to hire our outreach staff to solve, unsolved cases, our outreach workers are like detectives. They find our guys, David. And there's many ways they do that through social media. They go to the courts, find out when they got court next time. I mean, there's like so many tools they use. The point here is that we've been able to train, develop staff, right, to go identify individuals, to go find them individuals, right, and bring them into the program. And once they come into the program, we're able to give them a job right there and then. It's what we call the transitional job. And then we also recognize the cognitive psych of individuals, right? So we provide what we call cognitive behavioral intervention services. And we do that now 5 days a week for an hour at a time. And then we pay them for that, David. We pay our men, right, a gift card of $25 for participating in this kind of behavioral intervention services. We pay our men for professional development, $25. And then once they complete 100 hours of CBT or CBI, and then we bring them into various aspects of workforce experiences through our for-profit institutions or nonprofit partners that we have, where they're learning specific skill sets, with support with coaches that are in the workforce space. And the idea, David, is like people come because of the jobs, people stay because of the CBI, the kind of behavior intervention.
I mentioned the Sentencing Policy Advisory Council, which is a state agency here in Illinois, which I encourage people to go to their website, by the way, and look at the research that they've done on what works, what doesn't, and particularly cost-benefit analysis. And in their cost-benefit analysis of what works and doesn't work and what works best to reduce recidivism in the Illinois prison system, cognitive behavioral therapy consistently comes out at the top of that list of one of the most effective ways of addressing the problem that leads to people committing crimes. And now, obviously, if this is effective in preventing people from returning to prison by going back to crime, or as I say, before you can go straight, you have to get your head straight. So it works in prison to prevent people from coming back to prison. Oh my goodness. Logically, you'd be deploying that before people go to prison to prevent them from committing those crimes in the first place. And so that really strikes me as being a research-based, proven strategy that you're deploying there with cognitive behavioral initiative or intervention that you've described. And then you have jobs, an alternative to crime as a means to survive. Now, what kind of jobs and how do you get the money to do this? This is all really important and fascinating.
Yeah. So when I mentioned earlier in the segment, our partnership with the University of Chicago's Crime Lab and Heartland, that was possible because of the philanthropic community here in Chicago, and some from even outside our city, where they recognized that they wanted to address the immediate problem today and hence what CP4P is actually doing, which is a program out of the Metropolitan Family Social Services. And it's like hiring outreach workers to go back into the community and support individuals, right? Try to get as much as ahead of the problem as possible. And then with READI, because of what you just mentioned, we knew that there was good evidence, right? Evidence-based services already with research that demonstrates that cognitive behavioral therapy, both in prisons, like in Cincinnati, and with high school students through the BAM program, have demonstrated positive outcomes. We also know, right, that workforce job opportunities also have helped to reduce gun violence with youth job programs, summer programs, so on. So like for us, it was like, well, so let's marry that. And then what else is needed? So, it's interesting, David, because here's also what we've learned. The CBT or CBI, initially what we were using was a curricula based out of Cincinnati that Director Jeffries actually even leveraged when he was a director of prisons down there. And good positive outcomes. When we tried to use that same curriculum with our own participants, there was a lot of modifications that we had to do about wording, language, and so on, more strength-based, because the scenarios that are played out are different. There's prison scenarios, and then there's like real street dynamic scenarios. And we did a landscape analysis to see if there's any other curriculums out there right now that really focus on people who carry guns. And what we learned, there's a gap there. There really wasn't a curriculum designed solely for people who just typically walk around with guns for public safety reasons. So we did develop this curriculum, and now we've been implementing this to test this out as well. So that's one piece that I want to mention about how the field is evolving. The field is constantly evolving, David. But the other part too about philanthropy, which is what you were leading to, is that I am extremely grateful of the MacArthurs, the McCormicks, the Pritzkers, all those foundations that have been supporting our work, because it's taken that level of leadership on their end, from their boards, from those presidents, to recognize that we have to do something different about gun violence. And as a result of that investment, and I'm all big about ROIs, and I hope your audience sees this, but when somebody entrusts me with resources, particular financial resources, it's my job to make sure that I could execute to the best of my ability and provide a good return of investment off those resources. I could tell you that our early analysis, we're about 90% completed with the research study, which I neglected to mention for your audience, that our partnership also with the crime lab has to do with also them providing a randomized controlled trial study. This is the same kind of studies that we do with medicine, what we do with vaccines. And it's unfortunate that we had to do it for this population to just simply demonstrate that this population is worth investing in. But we've done this, and it's because of that research, because of the rigor of the evaluation, why government, DOJ, the CDC, the president's office are asking these questions, because there's no other program like this in terms of the rigor. Are there services like this? Yes, absolutely. And now we could further validate their work across the country, David. People who have been doing this work and like intuitively we know this works, but we just haven't had the science to support this. Well, now we do, David. And here's the thing, ROI. We're seeing those in the treatment group versus the control group, and this is comparing apples to apples. We're seeing a little bit over 30% reduction of victimization. We're seeing those who take up READI Chicago 30% less likely to be a victim of gun violence. 30%, David.
As a victim.
As a victim. As a victim. And this is like, again, I want to emphasize to your audience, this is working with the most acute risk individuals. This is scientifically demonstrating that we are identifying those who are at the highest risk. Just because you come from Inglewood or from North Lawndale doesn't mean you fall in that category. Simply just because of you live in certain neighborhoods doesn't mean that you're right away qualified to these high risk individuals. The second thing that I'll say, David, is that we are seeing 80 about 80%, plus or minus 1 point, about 80% of those in READI Chicago who have taken the intervention have 80% of them, compared to the control group, have not been arrested for murder or attempt murder. That means that 80% of those in the control group, we're seeing 80% more people in the control group arrested for murder or attempt murder. That, my friend, is where the gold is at. And we have to mine that. We have to mine those lessons from that, David.
So, in other words, it's working. What you're doing works. And it's all from that point, not a matter of, well, how do we address these problems? It's how do we scale up these solutions? And how do we find the resources to do it? What I call, as a matter of public policy, the resource riddle, because we're not made of money.
Yep.
But it isn't a matter of, well, we don't know how to solve problems. It's really more a matter of how do we fund and deploy and scale up the solutions to those problems. And what does that boil down to? Purely a question of priorities.
Absolutely. Show me your budget, and I will tell you where your priorities are at. Show me the city's budget. Show me the state's budget. Show me the county's budget. Show me the president's, right, Congress budget. And I will tell you, David, where your priorities are at. And we talk a lot about race and equity. It's all tied into that, David. We talk about mistrust with law enforcement. It is all tied into that. You could accomplish so much of that, David, if we're just willing to just look at what the science is telling us, leverage the data that's out there to help inform, to make more healthy and informed decisions. Put your politics aside. Put what all the other issues, right, that often get in the way, and focus on the solutions. There are many solutions out there right now, David, that we could draw from. And READI Chicago is an example of that, David. That is an example. You want to see more Eddies in the world? You want to see more Marlon Chambers in the world? This is one approach to do that. I say this is one approach because there's many approaches to this work. But we have the science and the data to back up what I've always known, David, that this population is worth investing. And if you do it the right way, we could have good success. It's unfortunate, though, that most of our funding, about 87% of our funding, comes from philanthropy. We're going on year number 5 now. We need government to step in. We need government resources, right? This program was never intended to be supported by philanthropy 100%. We need government to step in, to say, okay, Eddie, what are the lessons learned? How can we support this? What can be some things differently from those lessons you learned? And the last thing that I'll say around this, David, and this is really critical for your audience, I would say you have to work and identify the right population if you're serious about reducing gun violence. That also means it's costly. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you to invest in this, especially early on. The second thing is that you have to bring the community into the solutions of this as well. And we've done that through our partners as well and through other coalitions. That's really critical. David, I started off this conversation by simply pointing this out. None of us chose to be born to the parents that we were born to or to the zip code that we were born into. That determines a lot of what your future is going to look like. So we have an opportunity here to think about the lessons that we learned through READI and the lessons that we learned through other models to applying them in a way where it's like, how do we prevent people from making these mistakes early on? And for those who are right now in the cusp of this world, of this lifestyle, coming in and out of prison, right, who are running around with guns, that needs intense services. It needs that. And I would just conclude on my end, David, by saying this. If we're also serious about this work, that we also need to invest in the capacity of many of these local agencies to be able to provide the best quality service they can. That means not just training frontline staff. That's important, but that's just only a small piece. You need to improve their HR practices. You need to improve and support them to build in internal policies and procedures. databases, legal counsel, right? So that our agencies could be more willing and more like to work with this population. David, let me tell you this. Those results that we have with READI Chicago, I give our partners 110% credit for the success. And the reason why I say this is because there's so many other agencies who want to do this, but didn't have the tenacity, didn't have what I would say the grit to challenge their own internal culture within those agencies, or to challenge themselves in the field of how we've gone about this work. And we got some good partners that have said, you know what, we will change the way that we've gone about our work to provide services for this population. And if you talk to any of our executive director who are our partners of ours, they would tell you that some of them, you should think that they were serving this population 100%, and they realized that was not the case. So the lessons that we're drawing here within READI, we're starting to share that with other cities. We're partnering with the city of Philadelphia. There are local cities here that I wish we could have the same conversations versus constantly going to other cities and export these lessons learned. We could do the same thing in our state, but for that, there has to be an interest, there has to be an appetite, there has to be a will, and some of that will is also a political will.
Which is why Justice Voices exists, to try to change public perceptions and, as a result of that, change public policy, working from the grassroots level up rather than the political level down, which is the latter being, as I sometimes say, kind of like trying to push a rope. You're working on the wrong end. That's not the way things work in a political environment. Just a reflection, just to wrap up on my end. Some people might be thinking, okay, as we deal with the most acute stages of this disease, of what Lonnie Athens calls violentization, yeah, it's expensive, it's difficult, but it's not hopeless. It can be done, and you're proving that. But now, from a cost-benefit analysis standpoint, why don't we start earlier? Why do we let the disease progress to that level? And what is the disease? The disease is violence. And violence spreads in much the same way as other diseases, and the primary carrier is trauma. And so let's start early and not let the disease spread to the point where it becomes as acute as in your world that you're dealing with. It's much more cost-effective, but even in its most advanced stages and that you're dealing with, you've demonstrated, you've proven there are solutions that work. So we have answers to these problems. And this is real crime fighting. Crime fighting, to me, is this arena, not the punishment arena, and not in trying to incarcerate everybody and figuring that that's going to be a solution. It's oftentimes necessary, but it's not a solution. It's an intervention. And so I just want to tell you what I told you when we first sat down about 3 years ago and talked. Yours is a story that needs to be told, and yours is a voice that needs to be heard. So thank you very much for being on this program, and God bless you in your work and for your work.
Thank you, David. Definitely appreciate the time and just your advocacy around these issues of bringing more awareness. Thank you for that.
To hear Mr. Bocanegra's personal backstory, please view segments 1 and 2 of this episode, linked below, or listen to the full audio podcast, available as episode 12 on our website at justicevoices.org. For more episodes of Justice Voices, please visit either our website for full audio conversations or go to our YouTube channel for selected video segments. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to both the audio and video versions of this program and hit the like and bell buttons below. There's a lot more coming that you won't want to miss. This is Justice Voices, stories that need to be told, voices that need to be heard.